Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm so grateful to be one. And I'm so grateful to be back home. It is 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm in my house. You can probably recognize all the stuff behind me. And tonight we're here with Sensei John Doc Spears. And I just want to start out of the gate. I want to ask you, it's so funny because we talked before about what we might chat about, and you talked about martial arts as a living philosophy. And I'll talk to my students and I'll say martial arts is for life. That doesn't mean they have to sign up for life. It means that it's for their lives, whether they're in class or not. And so I actually want to go very specifically at the idea of having served as a Green Beret, which we'll get to in Sensei Dauphin's introduction. But unless I'm mistaken or was missing a show, that's a first for us. And I want to ask you, what do martial artists not understand, as dedicated as they might be, who haven't served that way? And what do they absolutely understand that non-martial artists wouldn't when it comes to serving that way?
I think number one that, when it comes to employment as a fighter in the military sense, is that martial arts, what we're all used to, has almost no role in any of that. Typically speaking, for the military operator, martial arts is an outstanding way of building aggressiveness. It's an outstanding way of, exercising physical facility and doing things like that. But we win the fight through mastery of weapon systems, right? Time spent grappling, time spent, on the heavy bag, time spent, sparring and doing stuff like that is time away from what we should be doing to be war fighters, which is being masters of weapon systems. So, my introduction to martial arts came, I joined the Army at 17. And my really formal introduction to martial arts started in the U.S. Army. And while it was a part of like daily, physical hygiene and things like that, when it came to the time where I transitioned into being a special forces operator, it was always maintained as a very primary means of physical fitness, but it was never used to substitute for any other amount of training that was way more important to our job winning the fight. So the idea that dudes are out there kung fuing each other, they're stabbing dudes with knives, or they're doing stuff like that, is just, complete fallacy. There are guys who, in extremist, as a last ditch in close quarters combat, have had to, kill an enemy with a knife, during the GWAT, things that have gone on in the sandbox or stuff like that. But, it's the rarity.
So let me break into two questions on that. One is, do you believe that's always the case? Because we know that so many servicemen going back to the 40s and 50s and Vietnam brought back what basically became the foundation of martial arts in North America. Do you think they were using this as a hobby thing on their free time, or do you think they were, before the weaponry was advanced the way it is today, using it more effectively? Or do you think it was still hobby-ish time away?
Well, weaponry is not advanced in the last, 80 years in any way that significantly changes what the individual soldier does on the battlefield to take the fight to an enemy and win. Nick and I know, and, have as part of our lineage, many of the guys who were in post-World War II Japan in those days at the Kodokan, who brought judo and jujutsu and karate to America and kicked off a lot of that, ability to learn the traditional Japanese martial arts, from that infusion into the West Coast of the United States and elsewhere. But those guys were all over there doing that as extracurricular activities.
Right. And then one more thing before we come back to philosophy. You used the term a couple times already, operator. Now, when you watch every single cool show that's about, Black Ops over in Tehran, etc., the operators are always the G's who show up with the big beard. They got the tats, and we love these guys. Explain for me and everybody who's not familiar what this term operator means and why it's become so badass.
Um, it's become diluted over time. Operator is actually a legal definition. In the late 70s, when Special Forces Operation Detachment Delta was stood up to give the Special Forces members in Delta the ability to do much of what they were doing internationally and working in and out of embassies and give them some other status. It was originally wanted to give them an agent classification, like a federal agent. But, you know, the legal definition is somebody has to have graduated from a federal law enforcement academy, to be granted the title of agent, because that comes with being legally sworn to have the authority as an agent, including arrest powers and investigation powers. An operator was a legal term that let them be badged as State Department officials. And I truly believe, and I know I'm right, that that's where the term originated. And then it just kind of spread out there. And of course, the guys CAG were pretty jealous when, you know, it's like then, you know, the Marines started calling, you know, their recon guys recon operators, and, you know, the Navy became operators. And then, you know, it was natural during that same period of time for Special Forces A-team members to be referred to as A-team operators. But you're right, in a way, it's like now it's like everybody's an operator. And it's actually when I was involved in that aspect of the defense industry, teaching weapons and marksmanship manipulation skills. You know, the classes that we would teach, you know, defaulted back to like what the HK schools were, because back in the 80s, you'd go to HK training to be certified as an MP5 operator. So, you know, it's like it just kind of evolved that people came to learn to be, you know, carbine operators, to be, you know, pistol operators, to be, you know, So it's a term that's kind of lost a little bit of its original meaning and has become diluted. It's a term that's probably still not familiar to most people, but that's a great question, man. And that's the history of it.
I really appreciate that. And that is very specific and cool concept. So let's come back. We like to have a little chat before our intros. Let's come back to this idea of martial arts as a living philosophy. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's delving right into kind of the esoteric, isn't it?
Let's do it. We'll come back to more linear history after the intro.
Yeah, get back into the concrete kind of nuts and bolts kind of stuff like that. You know, I originally was turned on to this you know, early on by a common teacher that Nick and I had, a guy named Carl Scott, who had a lot of very, very important insights into things. And I sure learned a lot from him. And one of those is that martial arts is a living philosophy. And at the essence of that, it means it is a study in a body that only exists when it is being actively practiced. And the benefits that come from that practice are only imbued upon an individual when he is actively studying and practicing it. It is a thing that only exists in its truest form on the mat. And the benefits that a human being gets from that only exist by that time spent on the mat. So in contradistinction to a lot of other mind-body activities, you know, a lot of things that, you know, baseball and, you know, other ball sports and golf and other things like that can exist. They can exist on the internet. They can exist in books. You know, the same thing in martial arts. You can, you know, argue all you want in the chat rooms about which is better, which is more badass, and which is more effective, and all of those things. But the full expression of that art form and the tradition and the benefits it brings to develop a more complete and authentic person only exist when they are being practiced. So, I will take this out into another direction, because one of the things I have a very firm belief in, when it comes to heuristics. Heuristics is that branch of philosophy that studies how knowledge is acquired. I have a very firm belief that goes back many, many generations, hundreds of years, that if a man can learn one thing well, he can learn anything. We all know Musashi put that down. I hate to make that reference, but there it is.
We love it around here.
And some things seem kind of cliched, but sometimes cliches exist for a reason. When it comes to that idea of the martial arts as a living philosophy, and then taking that and applying it to the other forms of martial expression, part of that extends into things that I would also talk about when it comes to the other things I believe in, principle-based teaching, is this idea of developing the one mind theory, which I think at so many levels is just that idea of being able to access performance on demand, that you're tapping into an unconscious body of knowledge that resides in your brain, that's gotten there by thousands, hundreds of thousands, years of correct repetitions that are able to be accessed on demand. And that's really what any unconscious skill, and what I think a lot of no mind, misspoke earlier, what no mind really is. The things that I'll take another diversion. Special forces, the core mission of special forces and everything else that we do is based around this central mission called unconventional warfare. Unconventional warfare, UW, is the doctrine wherein a 12-man special forces A team infiltrates covertly into a foreign country that is undergoing some form of civil disruption, civil war, insurgency, and that we are supplying, arming, training, leading the insurgents in their just war against the oppressors, and that we are mainly using those people to carry out U.S. foreign policy on our behalf without having to commit United States men and women to go and do that job for them. Unconventional warfare is the basis for everything else that Special Forces does. Where am I going with this? At all levels of the military, from the beginning all the way up to the extremely advanced, leadership and the ability to train and teach is instilled from the earliest training of a soldier. The ability to break skills down into their component parts, to demonstrate it, to explain the fundamental aspects of those, to teach them, to pass that knowledge on to another person, to be able to observe them and validate them that they're doing right. And that's how we build, that's how leaders build subordinates. That's how we build and develop capabilities. And that's very much what my job was in Special Forces, working in other countries and building up foreign militaries and friendly police forces and doing things like that. A lot of teaching involved. So I thought I had a lot of really, really good skill at teaching and analyzing and understanding the component parts of very complex tasks. And I did. And I had been studying martial arts for a very long period of time and had inklings about understanding principles and things like that. And once I committed myself to a very dedicated study of traditional martial arts and started to understand the basics of principle-based teaching, my ability then as a special forces operator to do my job increased, not because I was necessarily deadlier in some sense, by by the additional tasks and things that I had learned to do as a grappler and as a external fighter, an internal martial artist or something like that, but just in my ability to teach and transmit mind-body information through principle-based teaching. And I know this is a long roundabout, and I'm kind of famous for that. I think Nick's probably tracking with me.
It's not the first time we've had a conversation like this.
But, sorry. But, if I go too far astray, he'll pull me back. So, yeah, bringing it back in now and trying to answer your question, Sean, about a living philosophy, understanding all of that took me to a higher level in all of the other things that I was doing during the next phase of my life in the defense industry, working as a consultant and a trainer for the military, law enforcement, special operations, qualified civilians, for my work training snipers and assaulters for people who have those jobs, which is very, very technical, to be able to say, here's the principles, here's the things like that, but I'm going to lay stuff on you that you're not ready to hear, dudes, young soldiers, young cops, young guys, is what you are doing is making you a better, more contented person, a better member of society, better husband, a better father, a better friend, a better everything, because if you understand and let yourself embrace that what you're doing is part of a living philosophy, you're really not doing anything different than those of us who committed very large parts of their life to self-development through study of the traditional martial arts.
Love that.
In developing this no mind by consciously or unconsciously participating in a process to understand, to intuit, to act, to access unconscious skill on demand. I liken a lot of that process of training to like a fitness trainer teaching somebody how to stretch, if you will. Teaching somebody like a correct stretch of their hamstrings or whatever, that person might not have any idea about the different muscles that compose the hamstrings. They might not understand where the origin or insertion of those muscles are. None of those things. They might not understand any of the microcosm that builds up into the big gestalt of what's going on when they're doing a stretch properly. Whether they understand that or know it or not, they are receiving the benefit of that act, regardless of whether they realize it or not. Follow me?
100%.
Kind of. Yeah, I know it's kind of convoluted. So talking about a living philosophy and all these things and drawing together, and what I further went on and did, like I said, in my job building gunfighters, is saying, guys, whether you've ever participated in any of these other kind of things that you may think is kind of esoteric, look, I dig, man. You do combatives, you're doing, MMA, whatever it is, and, and they're necessary things for most of those guys, especially my cops, laying hands on people, being very conversant and unafraid to get in there and mix things up. That is an inherent part of their job. The guys who don't do that are at a huge disadvantage. Or they're the guys who let their partners down. They're the guys who let the citizenry down, because they're afraid to engage and tussle and do things like that and know how to do it well. But for all those guys, I would have these conversations and say, look, dudes, this is out there, but take there for what it is. If you allow it to be and you understand what's going on, even if you don't, but especially if you do, you can be part of this living philosophy that it's more than just the physical and the mind body. You are making yourself a better person. And there is almost no other pursuit that I think can do that to the extent that martial arts can do that. whether you ever have to use those skills in some sort of life or death or otherwise threat situation, the real beauty of studying martial arts and what it does for people is make them a better person. And I doubt any of you would probably have a major point of contention with me about that.
Well, let me take that as a chance to introduce everybody, and then we'll get back to introducing exactly who you are and who we've been listening to.
Just that and the other thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sean Benson. Like I said, we're here with Sensei John Spears, who's going to get our full proper introduction in a moment. But I do want to say that if you're here watching on YouTube or you're listening on podcasts, hit that subscribe, hit that like. We're so happy you're listening, but that means you're probably asynchronous. If you're with us in real time on Zoom, we got the chat button at the bottom of the screen, and we want you to be a part of this living history. You're here in real time, so that light just went up with the red dot and the chat button. Chip in questions for our sensei here, who's got a God, the things this man has seen that probably none or few of our guests have seen. It'd be a great time to ask some questions. And I just want to say that I'm here with Hanshi Gary Legacy, Sensei Nicholas Suino, Sensei Randy Dauphin. And, I'm just going to say really simply that I love so much what our guest said earlier about finding these philosophies, finding these truths on the mat, in the room, doing the thing. And when I look at these three teachers of mine and these three gentlemen, these are people who have done it on the mat. And that's all I'll say is that none of them don't gear up. None of them sit at the side and tell you what to do. They do it beside you or in front of you every time. So thank you for that, my senseis and my co-hosts. Sensei Dauphin, I'll throw it to you.
Thanks so much, Sean. I'm excited to introduce Sensei John Spears. He began his martial arts training when he was 17 years old while he was in the U.S. Army. And he's engaged in that study of Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, and other schools of martial arts for decades now. We talked about this. He was an operator, the legal definition, operator, in the U.S. Army Special Forces. He was a Green Beret, and he spent most of the 1980s on an A-team in the 7th Special Forces Group in Central and South America, engaged in the United States mission against communist insurgents and narco-terrorists. Later on in his career, Sensei Spears became an orthopedic spine surgeon. Before we went live, he just said he just ended his practice recently. But yeah, if you got a crooked back, he can help you out.
Not no more.
While a surgeon, he continued to work in the defense industry, serving the Department of Defense and law enforcement special operations at federal, state, and local levels to provide training for assaulters and snipers. Also, Sensei Spears is a science fiction writer. If you go on Amazon, you're going to see a lot of his books there. He's also a shooting instructor, and as I mentioned, a surgeon. He was on the Army kickboxing team. He's done judo and iaido with Sensei Suino as well. And also, he's the director at Forge Tactical LLC. And I'm going to read a little blurb from their website. Forge Tactical is focused on supporting the mission of our nation's armed citizens, law enforcement officers, and military professionals through evolved realistic training. And I've looked at some of the videos. Like even the wound dressing and stuff looks really gross when you're looking at it, even though it's made up. It gives you a realistic look at things. For a fighter to realize their potential, then judgment, physical skills, weapons handling, marksmanship, leadership, and aggression must be repeatedly blended and shaped in the pressure and heat of realistic training. Forge Tactical helps fighters achieve this potential through the delivery of programs that guide the student through the building of skills into techniques and techniques into procedures. I've known Sensei Spears for a while. We met like a number of decades ago. I haven't seen him for decades, but I asked him if it was okay to say this before. This guy's, he's the real life Rambo, right? So if you saw First Blood, John J. Rambo is a Green Beret, and but I think you're going to see that Sensei Spears brings a different level of intelligence to that. Okay, he's lived a life of service and continues to live a life of service. If you haven't noticed already, he's a friendly man. He's an intelligent man. He's a capable man, and he's a serious man. Um, and like other guests we've had on, and we haven't, people that I know, like people like Hunchy Sandoval, who is a Marine, and Hunchy Montalvo, an ATF undercover agent. He's not the type of man who's going to be really easily impressed with your best tournament win, right? Like that's not one of the things that's really going to impress him about you as a martial artist or a human being. I'm really proud to have him on here. I think we're going to have a really good conversation. And I want to take a second to punch it over to Setsuino because I know they're good friends, and just let him add any thoughts that he wants to add. Deprivating or complimentary, whichever direction you want to go.
He knows every bad story about me practically that's ever been out there, so he ain't got to say anything nice about me.
Yeah, that's a long list on both sides. Listen, man, I first met John through martial arts training here in Ann Arbor, and we became fast friends. I can't speak highly enough of him, and I think some of the comments that I'll have will come during the time that we talk about his progression in life and how he moved through martial arts.
It's been 35 years, man.
Holy smokes!
I know. I turned 60 this year, so it makes the math easy.
Well, it's nice to be a young man. You just savor those years.
Savor my youthful years.
Right. Holy shit! There's so much to say. We trained together like insane people back in the day, and while I was introducing John to Iaido and judo and a little bit of jujitsu, he was introducing me to kickboxing in a most remarkable way. The first time John kicked an airbag that I was holding, it was an enlightening experience because I had a lot of pretenders kick airbags that I held up until that time, but it was definitely a time that made me sit up and take notice. We started training together. We lifted weights together. We ate a lot of meals together. We ended up living in the same house for a long time up in Lansing. John bought
all we did was train at the dojo and lift.
And eat.
This guy, I couldn't yet. He didn't have a neck. He had earlobes that went down to like his shoulders.
And holy crap. The stories can go on and on. I shot a lot of 22 rifle and shotgun as a kid, but John bought me my first wheel gun as an adult, which I owned for many years, and then branched off into a lot of other firearms activities. I've been to some of the courses that he's taught. Holy shit. I mean, I like the progression of martial arts. You train with somebody for 10 years and you become fast friends, dojo friends. I have a very few people that have graduated from being martial arts friends to personal friends. John is a brother to me, and always will be.
Ditto.
And one of the most influential people in my life, and I like to think I've had a little influence on his life path as well.
You're darn tootin'. It's like I said, there's so many things in those years that you taught me and that we learned together that, like I say, propelled me to that next level of how, I was able to go out and do what I did with some success. No question about it. And we even had some fun during those years. We were poor, but we had a lot of fun.
We sure did.
Well, let's get to those in a moment, but let's pop to you, Sensei Spears. Let's go back to the beginning. What was it like for you growing up? What brought you into your first martial arts environment?
I think I'd always toyed around with it a little bit, getting a kid, but I never found a school, that really, attracted me, or, I lost interest a lot in things as a kid. And the only thing I really ever wanted to do was jump out of airplanes and shoot bad guys. So I dedicated myself to graduate high school early so I could enter the Army early. And at 17, I left. And it was at that point for me that a whole new world opened up, and I found myself able to focus and do a lot of these other things. And, an interesting thing in the military, no matter where you find yourself or what your job is, you are surrounded by a the widest variety of people of any situation you could probably find yourself in America, except maybe prison, you know. And one of those things that was so awesome is making friends with guys who were Taekwondo guys, they were Tang Soo Do guys, they were karate guys, they were Kung Fu guys, they were boxers, they were kickboxers, there were stuff like that. And having people who just, you know, would knock on your door and say, let's go train, and disappear and start dedicating every moment that you could to learning something from somebody and applying it. And I mean, just a fantastic experience. That's how I got exposed to the Filipino martial arts, which, you know, until I joined the military, I, honest to goodness, knew nothing about the Filipino martial arts. And, you know, had buddies who'd grown up in Southern California who were Eskrima and Arnis and Kali dudes who, you know, were only too happy to get you working on sticks and knives and things like that. And believe me, in an environment like that, after 2 or 3 years of training regularly, there's quite a bit of that seeps into your technique and ability, and is you know, it's just a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful opportunity when I look back on it. And then you know, when I made selection for special forces and entered that plan, I mean, it was kind of like that same situation, only amped up on steroids. Only now that really becomes formally part of your job and what people what they expect from you.
So I got a quick question about that, because you're speaking about this in a way that gets me excited. I mean, I went to a boys' camp and it wasn't quite that military aspect, but it was constant, let's go. Here's what we're doing. What is your thoughts, and we will go around the horn on this, on mandatory military service?
Start with me?
Sure. Do you think there should be
Absolutely not.
No?
Nope. No democracy has a right to exist if it can only survive by forced conscription. The military does not want conscripts. You know, I started my military career in the early 80s, where there were still some remnants of the draft army. Now, there are people who they had, you know, been drafted in the 60s or 70s who subsequently, you know, signed up. So they were volunteers, but you would talk to leaders, especially like battalion level leaders. You know, I knew lieutenant colonels and things like that, you know, when I was a kid, who, you know, you'd ask them that question and they would say, absolutely not. You know, by the time the early 80s came around in the United States, the Army had been an all volunteer force since the mid 70s. And anybody who'd been around during that period of time would tell you that the quality and the difference between the draft army and the all volunteer force was so night and day. Nobody in their right mind would ever want to return to a conscript force.
I'm really glad I asked that. I never would have thought of it through that lens. Let's jump to you, Sensei Suino. What do you think about the idea of a mandatory, like a conscription?
Listen, I'm the farthest thing from an expert on this. I'll 100% accept what John shared with us on this. And by the way, a mutual friend of ours, Richard Birkeland, is on the call as well, and he echoes your sentiments. But it's been interesting that for decades we've talked about conscription as a possible path to citizenship in the United States. And I don't know that conscription is the secret, but we do lack a certain cohesion among the people of the United States who don't necessarily believe that they have a responsibility to their country. And I'm not sure conscription is the path to that, but something, whether it's a Peace Corps, an employment corps, courses in college, which I think would probably lead to absolutely nothing, maybe even a worse outcome. So yeah, I have no idea from the perspective of a military person whether it's a good or a bad thing, but I do think that in some sense, the United States, at least as a country, could use some means of having young people, aspiring adults, go through a period of education and labor that would make them more cohesive afterwards. I don't know if that's even a possibility, but I think it would be a good thing if it were.
Thanks, Sensei Sweeto. Hanshi Legacy, let's go to you. I mean, one could argue you've been anti-establishment at times in your life. What do you think about the idea of having to give a certain type of service to your country?
I would, if we find ourselves in the type of world that we're in today, I would say, yeah, everybody should be forced, not forced, but should be drafted into the army and serve a certain amount of time to keep that country free. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks, Hanshi. What about you, Sensei Dauphin?
Well, you and I have talked about it before. I think, while I'm not an expert on the military, I studied military history for a long time in school. And when I look at countries that have mandatory military service, I don't know how you jump from not having it to all of a sudden having it. Like, that's a different question and conversation. But those countries that do have mandatory military service seem to have more patriotic people who are willing to do things. And the one thing I do like about mandatory military service is there's a commonality amongst every citizen in those countries. They all have a common experience. Maybe it's not good for, as Sensei Spears is talking about, like, maybe they're not the most elite fighters when it comes to defending their country. But I do think it builds a certain base level patriotism in those countries that have it. And that's just my opinion on it. I'm not stating facts, and I'm not trying to get up on a pulpit and state a fact, but I do think there'd be great benefits, especially in the types of societies that we have right now, where like feelings are facts. Well, feelings aren't facts, right? Facts are facts. And you can feel however the hell you want, but there's still facts to the way the world works and politics works and the economy works, and your problems are not the world's problems. And I think some mandatory military service would help people realize that your problems are not the world's problems.
Well, I can just say that as somebody who's been part of that conversation for, going on 40 years, there clearly is not a right answer. You had great professional soldiers like David Hackworth, who were very adamant that they believed in universal conscription, that he thought that those guys brought, a fantastic diversity, to the military, and that they were good for it, So there's certainly no universal opinion on all of that. I would say that the real problem is not so much in some kind of mandatory service to your country, but at least in the United States, the fact that we've drummed patriotism out of the school system at every level. We don't indoctrinate kids with the basics of the foundation of our country and why we're a moral nation anymore. The military does not even do that form of indoctrination through the basic training process, and never has, because the culture in the schools used to do it. The people who the military received already had that common level of knowledge, and the military has never done it. So it's like, a kid who joins the service today who never got it in his public school education, who's now found himself in the Marines or the Army or wherever, or something else like that, they're not giving that basic education to them during that process of basic military training either. And I think that is more significantly the difference, because I can tell you the military ain't teaching anybody those things.
That's a great point.
They may pick it up along the way. It's like, say, they get the benefits of understanding what it means to serve. And, especially people who get out and they go to other countries and they see what things are like, and they come home and get to appreciate that difference at some point, even if those things aren't really protractedly talked about and discussed in a formal way. Yeah, people always end up coming back changed from their experience. But the real issue is, like, we don't teach patriotism at any level.
Thanks, Sensei. I just want to chip in real quick and say, I really like what you said, Sensei. So, like the word service to me is really important here. Like, doesn't necessarily have to involve weaponry, but to serve your country. Like when you mentioned Peace Corps, something like if you're going and building wells somewhere that needs wells for your year of service on behalf of your country. I just think there's a lot of ways that could be really beneficial that don't involve military, but do involve service. And that would give what Sensei Dauphin describes as that bonded experience where what did you do for your service? And as a guy who got sober through 12 steps, service is the magic word. How can I be of service? And just want to throw that out there that I would not want conscripted military, but I do like the idea of conscripted service. Let's go back to you, Sensei. Spears, this is all about you. So talk us through your next while. You're touching on your martial arts. You're moving into the special forces. Tell us what that next while is for you. Tell us some, exciting stories. Were you shooting next to Carlos Hathcock? Like, talk to us about that.
Met him once.
Yeah.
Met him once. 87. I'd just gone through U.S. Army sniper school and happened to be back in the United States and was at a match at Quantico, Virginia, and he was there and got to meet him. That was not long after the book about him, White Feather, had come out and things like that, and all of that. Which was, it's funny how these things, in a life sometimes come back around. I was very proud of my role as a sniper. And I was one of the first graduates in the inaugural year. I'm a plank holder, it's called, of the U.S. Army Sniper School. I was the Top Gun graduate of class 487. And I had come off my A team in Panama and was sent to, back then Georgia was Fort Benning, it's Fort Moore now, and went through, one of the very first classes at the U.S. Army Sniper School. The first time the Army ever had a Army level training doctrine command sniper school. It used to be sniper was just like a division level school, things like that. Things I know you're not interested in. I'd already been a precision rifleman. I grew up, very much around firearms and doing those things, and was a long range rifleman. One of the reasons I succeeded so well in sniper school, and then went back to Central and South America, deployed. My next mission was in El Salvador for 6 months in the war there. I kept up with all of those skills over the years, and then got really back into it. And long story short, I'm still a trainer for U.S. Army snipers. I'm a contractor for the Warrior Training Center at Fort Moore, and they bring me down a couple of times a year, and I worked with their select groups of snipers, preparing them to go out for international competition. And last year at the international sniper competition, 5 of my teams placed in the top 10, including the top 3 slots. This year, I had an equal number of teams that I trained in the top 10, but we didn't get the top slot. My all-guard team came in second, about that far behind the guys from 3rd Ranger Battalion. So still a pretty outstanding year and real, but that all leads, I get to be sort of a mini celebrity when I show up, because like I'm probably the oldest human being these dudes have ever seen, and that I'm a plank holder of their sniper school, and I'm still out there doing it and teaching those guys something. It is very cool for me. Cool things still continue to happen to me, accidentally, while life goes on. But I spent, my special forces career, I had a solid 3 years on an A team based out of Panama back in those days, where I worked in Central and South America. I split my time between individual lone operator and full team missions in the 3 combat zones, El Salvador, Colombia, and Peru. Helped stand up a lot of the anti-narco terror programs in Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru, and just spent all those years doing that. And that in the 80s, we were the only people, our handful of guys in 3rd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group, the handful of A teams in Panama. We were the only guys in the entire Department of Defense who were regularly going into the shooting game.
And I want to get to your kickboxing in a moment because that's of great interest to us. But did you watch either Narcos or Narcos Mexico, the Netflix shows? I
did.
And how'd you find them? Are they close to anything you experienced? Are they close to, I mean, did they nail a validity there?
Oh, no. I thought that they were very accurate in a lot of ways. And, certainly the tragedies that happened in some of those countries to our people and how poorly it was dealt with. And, it's painting with a wide brush, but sometimes you get a lot of paint on the wall with them. The war on drugs was not a war. How much did we accomplish? I don't really think we accomplished a whole lot, to tell you the truth. We did improve a lot of our general security state in Central and South America. And, kind of all of the gains that we made helping to destroy, Marxist governments in that part of the world and keeping the whole hemisphere from falling into communism really kind of eventually got undermined by, the narco terrorists. So
that's fucking fascinating. Thanks for that perspective.
Yeah, that's a real short clip.
I know, but that's a really, like, I'm fascinated by that world and I've dug into it pretty deep. And to hear you say it that way, I take that in and I get it, at least as much as I can. But now let's go to something much more simple compared to global. Let's talk about kickboxing. Sensei Ofa, I want to throw it to you to guide these questions a little bit.
There's a rumor from somebody on the call that you are an Army kickboxing champion.
That is absolutely not true. I got my ass whipped more times than I can count.
So what did you get from it, and why did you keep doing it?
I was real, it's like I say, I had kind of a smattering of a background coming into that. And I had so many guys who, were great with their hands, guys who were boxers, guys who were great kickers, primarily guys who came from the Korean martial arts, Hapkido, Tang Soo-do guys and stuff like that, who, when you learn those power mechanics to kicking and punching, and you learn how to put those together and how to, and just how to apply those things, it's a lot of fun. And that's mainly why I did it, because it was a wonderful expression of things. When I was in Panama and I wasn't on missions, I had a close friend on another team who introduced me to Chinese martial arts, which some of those I later passed on to Nick. And I know he continues to use a lot of those principles and things like that. And it just became another form of expression of those martial arts and what I was able to do in free fighting. But oh no, I had my ass handed to me many, many times. You get in the ring with the guy who is primarily a boxer, who his game has always been using his hands. And if you can't keep him back, at a medium or longer distance with kicks, he is going to eat your lunch. A guy who does something, like what we used to call kickboxing, really breaking up 50-50 using hands and feet. A guy who's better with his hands, who only spends about 10-15% of his time with his feet, he only needs one kick. He only needs a decent, like, front leg roundhouse. He only needs like a decent front leg front kick. If he can get in you and start using those hands, I certainly got my lunch ate on more than one occasion, and I had a lot of respect for boxers. Came way for that. It's the same thing as once I got into the grappling world, I had a lot of respect for wrestlers. They may not develop or think about things or transmit information or play the same way, we do in judo, but I got a lot of respect for grapplers. And when you get in and try and play their game the way they do, I've had my lunch ate, on more than a couple occasions by wrestlers too. I have a lot of respect for anybody who's skillful. Where were we on all of that? But yeah,
That's
kickboxing was a lot of fun.
yeah.
No, I wasn't any kind of a champion. Maybe I won a couple of, local weight classes, primarily when I was down in Panama. That was a pretty small pond. I have no bragging rights.
Appreciate that. Sensei Dauphin, let's crack open this just a little before we go to our 10 questions. The idea of somebody who's just like magnificent with their hands, has a single kick, or somebody who's more of a general practitioner with feet and hands. What do you think are the pluses and minuses of either?
I think you can apply this to martial arts or whatever. You could be a sniper, you could be a specialist with one thing, but I think it's, for me as a martial artist, I like to be capable with my hands, my feet, be able to close a range and clinch, do a takedown, get on the ground, get back on my feet again. And I guess if, this is my opinion, if you're a specialist, like you got the greatest reverse punch on the face of the earth, if you come up against a martial artist or a person who is more capable, more intelligent, and has more techniques, they're going to figure that out super fast. And then to coin what Sensei Spears said, they're going to hand you your lunch. They're going to shut that down really fast, and they're going to capitalize, and you're going to find yourself in deep water.
Thanks, Sensei. Hanshi Legacy, what about you? I see you really taking in what he's saying about boxers. One of the first classes I was ever in, you said they're the best with their hands.
Yeah,
what are the pluses and minuses about being that good at one set versus a more whole set?
well, let's look at it on a real high level. Who was it? The O'Connor guy who fought for $100 million against, who was that, Randy?
Floyd Mayweather.
The boxer against Mayweather. Mayweather said he would never fight the other guy in a ring.
In an MMA ring, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, in an MMA style. He only wanted to fight him boxing because I guess is what everyone is saying right now. Somebody who's well equipped with more weapons is going to beat somebody with one weapon. Another way of looking at it is, all the great professional baseball pitchers, they have to have more than one pitch. Doesn't matter how fast they can throw that fastball, eventually you're going to catch on to you. So it's an open game out there, it really depends on the person who's handling that body, that certain amount of intelligence or know-how.
Sean, I would say also, like, a little bit of proof. I'm not suggesting that I could ever beat Fitz Vanderpool in a fight. The guy is like, but when I did fight him for my 50th birthday, when we bowed to each other and I lifted my right foot, he jumped right back and went, "Whoa, we said we weren't kicking, we're only punching." That's what he said to me, right?
Yeah.
So
well, and again, I think I've talked about this on the show, but Hanshi, I love that example you gave so much because obviously Floyd beat Conor fair and square, but the number of times Conor was behind him going, like, yeah, I'm behind him, but the rules prohibit me from doing anything. So I'm just raising my hands. And that's a pretty deadly place to be if you could do other things. Sensei Suino, I know your brow well enough to know you're thinking about this while we're talking about it. I can't wait to hear your thoughts.
Well, this whole conversation is one of the reasons I created that event at JMAC called the Crucible, right? Where we do 12 hours of training. We start with kickboxing, we do karate, we do wrestling, judo, takedowns, BJJ, to introduce people to all of those things, besides just having a really cool immersive experience. But I want to go a slightly different place. That is, nobody on this call has learned one punch and stopped, right? Nobody on this call has learned two punches and a kick and stopped. What's more interesting in the martial arts and really more interesting in life is that exploration, right? Is to learn things, put them out into the field, see how they play, work on your weaknesses, work on your strengths, get interested in variations and change. It goes all the way back to what John said early on, and that is that part of our job in this long arc of martial arts life is making ourselves and others better people. And you don't do that by learning one thing only, right? You may become a master of that one thing, but you become a master of exploration. And in the one thing, we learn many. And it means staying curious. It means staying philosophical. It means being a deep thinker. And it means never leaving the floor in some figurative sense, even if you, for some reason, can't get out on the mats and fight anymore, to still pursue further learning in this. So I mean, that may be a little esoteric, but I really think that's what it's all about.
Well, I wrote down a word that we don't have time to get to before our 10 questions, but we will after. And it's a word that our guest used, expression. So we're going to come back and talk about what that means. But for now, Sensei, it's time for your 10 questions. Are you ready?
We'll find out.
We'll find out. We ask that you answer as impulsively as you can, but feel free to expand on your answer.
Impossible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never had a short answer for anything in my life.
That's why we're starting a little early with you, Sensei. What is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
Drawing a pistol. Drawing a pistol only when I don't have a rifle to go to first.
Mm. Who is the most influential martial artist?
I'll expand on all of that.
Rip it. Go.
If you have to defend yourself and use deadly physical force with any tool, being it your hands, your feet, a knife, or you know, or a ballistic weapon, depending upon where you live, the law doesn't see that different in any way in the consequences that you're going to suffer. It is when you talk about like effective moves, what you're going to do in self-defense, things like that. And I'm not mocking you. I'm just saying it's a very, very common scenario that people think about things like that. Multiple attackers, the idea that you are going to succeed hand to hand against multiple attackers is pure fantasy. Doesn't exist, right? You want to know how I know? Well, it's very simple. We talk about epistemology and the ability to differentiate between opinion and a validated belief. Look at the Marine Corps Combative School, right? Where they teach their version of combatives and they invite the best MMA guys in the world to go through their crucible. How well do they do on the lane against multiple attackers? They all fail, every one of them, just like everybody does. And I don't mean to be lecturing, and I'm not lecturing to you guys, of course. You guys are all my seniors. You know, that's a fact. But when it comes to the use of deadly physical force and training people for do that, I may have more of an edge on that than a lot of other people by virtue of what I do and have done for many decades. It's helpful to think about criminal motivations and the types of criminals, you know, who are most likely to put you in a position where you may need to defend yourself or use deadly physical force, right? Criminal motivations, you know, I mean, they're broad categories. I mean, it's useful to think about the guy who's performing instrumental crimes, right? That's classification. That's the guy who's fairly rational. You know, he's an antisocial person. His background is maladaptive the way we think about it, but not for his background, right? You have something he wants, money, or what he can buy with money, and he's going to use violence against you if he has to. He'd rather use a threat to get what he wants and get out of there. You know, the people who are committing expressive crimes, the psychopaths, the terrorists, the mass shooters and stuff like that, they're not performing rationally, right? There's another category of criminal motivations that's kind of a combination of those two, but all of that adds up into the type of crimes that people suffer, whether they're suffering those things committed on them by an antisocial person who their background is such, it's totally fine to commit a crime against you to enrich myself because that's what I've learned from my environment, versus the psychopathic personality, of which those expressive crimes and terrorism and the massive shooters and stuff like that, for which there's no rationality behind. Well, at the end of the day, if you're in a violent situation, you don't get to choose what kind of criminal or what kind of crime is being perpetrated against you. And then your ability, and this is where I find, I think most, I mean, like I said, I paint with a broad brush, but you get a lot of paint on the wall, where most of us who study martial arts, who don't study the legal consequences of like self-defense, which is more commonly associated with like, personal protection, by an armed citizen or something like that, you're setting yourself up for a lot of trouble, especially depending upon the country you're in or the jurisdiction you're in. If you can't establish as soon as possible to the responding officer that you are the victim, you're behind the 8 ball. If you can't elucidate to somebody, to that officer, that, there was intent, there was means, there was opportunity, that guy was evincing a deadly intent. His physical posture, his face, he was balling his fists, his verbal, assault on me, I'm going to fuck you up, that you're establishing intent that you should be fearful of your life. You can establish that there's means, right? The guy wouldn't show me his hand. I think he had a gun or a knife, right? Or the guy was balling his fists, or there's opportunity. He wasn't yelling at me from across the bar. He was in my face doing all that. He had every opportunity. Intent means opportunity. I'm the victim. If you can't establish those things and you punch that dude square in the running lights and you kill him, guess who's going to jail? It ain't the dead guy. Right? Talk to, if anybody heard of that, there's a journalist named Michael Yon, Y-O-N, if you've heard of him, or people know his story. It's very interesting. SF guy in the Special Forces qualification course in a bar in North Carolina, just about getting ready to graduate after 2 years in the Q course, ready to become a Green Beret, goes to a bar, guy keeps hounding him, looks at him, keeps saying, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. Rather than leave, he ends up hanging out. That happens. And these are the essence of it. He punches the dude square between the running lights. Guess what happens? DRT. Guy hits the ground dead right there. What happens to Michael Yon, you think? Criminal charges, civil charges, never gets on an A-team, spends the next years in his army just trying to stay out of jail. He eventually gets out of it, but it drove him out of the country to be like an international traveling journalist and stuff like that. That's just one example. I dare say many of you yourselves, or certainly students that you've taught over the years, have ended up in an entanglement with the law from a physical altercation. Am I wrong? Has that never happened to any of your students? That you've, Sensei always hears everything. Sensei, I got in trouble Saturday night at a bar and I punched a guy and now the police are talking to me. Has nobody ever had that conversation in your dojo? Used to happen. Used to happen to me all the time, only I wasn't the guy crying about it. I was the guy bragging about it to Sensei. I bounced in the shittiest bar in Michigan for about 5 years while I was working my way through college. And I'm not a tough guy, but I'm saying I dusted a lot of dudes who needed it, and enjoyed putting them down and had a lot of fun with it, especially when nobody's looking. I can get away with it. Those guys were prisoners, come out of Jackson prison, visiting the bar, and we knew it because they had prison ID to show us their ID to get in the bar. Those guys would act up and you could whip their ass because they just had that much pride that said, you're going to have to whip my ass to get me out of this bar. But they wouldn't go complain to the popo, right? There's a college boy whose daddy's a lawyer who's going to, pinch the waitress's ass and he's going to get in your face and you end up taking him out. He's the first guy going down to the popo to make a complaint to the desk sergeant that I was minding my own business and this mean bouncer punched me. After a couple of years, I had a buddy who's a probation officer, Bob Hodder, who of course, very good friend with all the detectives in Ann Arbor, who pulled me aside and say, hey, the guys say the city prosecutor really knows your name and is hot on your ass. And next time you dust somebody, no matter what happened, I mean, the last guy who I put down, who went and bitched, tried to part my hair with a beer bottle, you know, pretty cleared, straightforward and stuff like that. And I didn't have, and nobody came to help me get the guy out of the bar. I had no choice but to like knock his ass down and stuff like that. He went right to the cops and complained. And Nick and I had a very good buddy who about a year after I quit that job, who was on his way to the police academy, who got in one of those altercations, and he damn near went to jail. Fortunately, all got pled out. He still ended up going to the police academy and having a very long career in law enforcement, right? But I mean, the actuality in a situation of whether you're using a weapon, a firearm, or whether you're using your fists and hand, and if you've ended up using deadly physical force, even if there's no criminal charges, the civil charges will make you understand that the process is the punishment. Anybody ever been through a civil trial?
We have not, but we got to get on to your next question or we will not get our 10 questions in.
Well, I'll tell you, this is a pretty important subject, and I respect you want to get through 10 questions. But when we start talking about effective techniques and using what's potentially deadly physical force on somebody, and there's a general lack of knowledge about some of these very important elements and things like that, we set our students up for failure.
Does that not sort of contradict what you said earlier about martial arts just being good when you're in a dojo floor?
I don't think that that's what I said. I think what I said was that martial arts is a living philosophy that only exists when it's being practiced. And that primarily occurs on the mat. But it extends to all aspects of our life on and off the mat if it's been practiced well.
Yes.
I appreciate that, Sensei, and I appreciate the weight and import of that topic. Let's jump to the next. Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
Well, certainly there's not one. One of them is sitting right here. You know, Nick is probably the most influential martial artist in my life. What he accomplished in Japan and what he brought back and what he did, I was very honored to be a part of his first school and his first assistant instructor, and the things that we did in those years, you know, are very important to me. And I think there's very likely nobody as influential in my martial arts career as Nick. But we had a lot of great teachers, and I was very privileged to get to, you know, like you guys, train in Japan, train with some of Nick's teachers, have that experience, you know, met great people around the world, and but he stands out there up at the top.
Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time, and why?
Well, for better or worse, I think, you know, it's probably universally Bruce Lee because he's the most famous. And certainly I think he wrote a fair amount that survives as part of his legacy. But, you know, we know people who knew him back in the day, you know, and he was a young man trying to make his way in the world who made a lot of mistakes and, you know, made an ass out of himself at times. And I think had he lived longer, he would have erased some of that and had the opportunity. But, you know, Nick and I know people who knew him back in the Oakland days who, you know, didn't necessarily have a lot of nice things to say about him. They didn't have bad things to say about him, but, you know, they were only too happy to point out some of his asshatness.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
The fact that I still can. You know what is, I'll tell you this very interesting, perhaps, Shitsuya Sato, who was the head of the International Martial Arts Federation and Nick's teacher. And I was privileged to have him a teacher for a few months when I was in Japan. And he was a very, very generous, giving individual. And it was such a great experience. But he said something to me daily. He was so kind and spent a lot of time with me individually. But he said something to me, and this time at this age, he was, in his 70s even, and he would say, as a young guy, it's possible to miss a year of judo, 2 years of judo, and pick it back up. And it happens with injuries and stuff like that. And he says, but when you get older, you have to train every day, something every day, or you will lose it. And that stuck with me from the time I was in my 20s until now. I'm almost ready for Social Security. And that is, the exciting part to me about that next 5 years of my life, that I am lucky enough where I can still train every day in something.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
Well done, my good and faithful servant.
Do you have a favorite film and television martial artist, whether they're actually great at martial arts or not?
I hate all wire fu. It makes me crazy. Can't even watch it. I guess I raised my boys that way. Everybody loves a good Jackie Chan movie. Yeah, now he's a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party, which makes me not like him. He stayed pretty silent about Hong Kong, going under the commies, because he knows what side his bread's buttered on. He's a little anti-American, but golly, you go back to one of the old Jackie movies from the 70s that's like a traditional Chinese martial arts story. That's some pretty good entertainment. And a guy who demonstrated, probably the most amazing facility of anybody I'd ever seen.
Right on. If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what benefit would they be getting?
I really think it's spiritual more than physical. Like I say, something that lets you contact that authentic inner self, and that every day lets you look in the mirror and say, whatever challenge is coming today, I've done worse, and I know I can tackle it.
Is there a martial artist, living or dead, in all of recorded history you'd like to train with the most?
I think probably the greatest martial arts who've ever lived are living right now. I think that there are a lot of utterly incredible historic figures, most of them real, a great number of them mythical, who I don't know that they would have ever been really accessible, or would have ended up being the teachers like the people that we have in existence right now. I really truly think I'm what do you call that? There's a cognitive bias that exists, where you always think that like things in the past were better than things are now. I can't remember what the cognitive bias is. I'll think of it later, but it's the same thing. It's like most all things. I actually think the best time is right now, and the best people are living right now.
Appreciate that answer. And our last two questions come as a pair. What is your greatest achievement, and what is your greatest regret?
Certainly my greatest achievement is being a dad. I know it sounds like a hackneyed answer, but I really, really mean it. Having kids and seeing them come into adulthood and be great people, nothing has ever made me feel better than that. My biggest regret, honestly, it's, my biggest regret in so many ways is being a doctor. Because most people don't really understand what it takes to do that. You know, I was even the first couple years in medical school and all the work it took, 5 years of undergrad, get a biochemistry degree. I left special forces, full-time active special forces, because I was in no way dissatisfied with what I was doing as an operator or the missions I was carrying out, and I wished it never ended. But I felt an obligation, and people let me know that they felt I had an obligation to do more because I had the ability to do it. And that was kind of a heavy yoke to carry, to tell you the truth. I left and went to college with the plan to go to medical school and do things like that because people I really respected, I felt like I might be letting them down if I didn't. And that's the honest to God truth. So I was still able to train and do a lot of what I wanted. I probably could have finished undergrad sooner if I didn't insist on training full time and working and doing all of that. And Nick and I's time together, I wouldn't replace for anything in the world. But by the time I started my third year of medical school, which isn't classroom, you're out in the hospitals, my life ended for the next 10 years, where all I saw was the concrete going into the hospital at dark 30 in the morning and the concrete leaving the hospital well after the sun had gone down for the next 10 years of externship, surgical internship, 5 years orthopedic surgical residency, a year of spine fellowship, the Cleveland Clinic, and all of that. All of a sudden, I found myself 40, the truly best years of my physical life had been spent locked away. And I pretty much said, if I end up not liking what I'm doing, I'm going to have to put a bullet in my head because I wasted the best years of my life. Now, thank God it all worked out. But like I say, when parents ask me, my kid's thinking about being a doctor, or I'm thinking about being a doctor, what do you think about that? I tell people, it's if there is no other way you can be satisfied in life, then you got to do what you got to do, and this is what goes along with it. But if you can find any other way in life to be satisfied, because it ain't no half in, half out kind of thing. It's 100% everything every day. And I lost a marriage. I, was depressed. I was not doing what I really wanted to do in my heart of hearts. I wasn't running the gun. I wasn't on the mat. I wasn't with the people I truly wanted to be with. And it enriched me. It gave me security. Thank God later in my life, the second marriage came along that truly enriched me and made my life whole. And I got 4 wonderful kids and everybody's turned out all right, even though I screwed up my first marriage and all of that. But, maybe that's more than anybody wants to hear. But if you've never heard it from anybody else who's done what I have done in that field, my greatest regret, despite whatever it may have done to enrich me in many, many ways, spiritually and financially, my biggest regret is becoming a doctor.
I love that candor because it's so easy to say it's the only thing we could have done. And I'd actually love to go around the horn on that. So I'm going to throw it to you, Sensei Dauphin. We choose these careers when we're young. We commit to them. We become this thing maybe before we have a lot of information about who we are. So let me just throw out, if you could go another way, career-wise, where would you go? What would you tell people would be the better choice for your young version of you?
Well, I'm living my best life right now. So I just want to throw that out. I'm really happy to get up every day, go to the University of Waterloo and work there. I love working there. I love going to the dojo and training and teaching people. So, but if I had to have a plan B, what would it be, Sean? You know what it would be. We've talked about it. What would my plan B be?
Just straight up martial arts teacher.
No, I'd go to the military, right? Like I would have been a military guy or a cop or something like that. That would have been the direction that I would have went if I didn't find my plan A. And I think I would have been happy and satisfied doing that.
Thanks, Sensei. What about you, Hanshi Legacy? You go back in time, your young guy's taking a different path, and he's actually going to follow it if you tell him to.
Mick Jagger.
No, I was like a war baby, and I came out there and lived on the East Coast, So finally, and I moved a lot. So my youth wasn't like rooted very well. So I got into a bit of trouble in my earlier years, and finally I ran into martial arts and it straightened me out. So, well, I had some problems. I find that my life led me to where I am now. And while there were hard times, I don't regret it simply because I'm here now. Right. If I could have hindsight, then maybe I could change some things, but that's not how life works. So here I am on this show, and I find that to be okay for me.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Suino, let's go to you. You've got a little Cheshire schmirk, we'll call it.
Well, I'm living it. I had a very similar experience, right? Around the same time I was in Lansing, I thought it made sense for me to go to law school. I did. I learned a lot of cool shit. I know more about how the government works and how politics work than I ever cared to know. Made a fair amount of money to it, but you know, I was never satisfied, never happy in it. And in 2005, walking in the woods every day, thinking about where my life was going, I asked myself who I was. And every day, if I got quiet and I really listened to the answer, it was always that I'm a martial artist. For better or worse, somehow, you know, it's like Hanshi says, sometimes it chooses you. And so that's when I, you know, decided to start getting out of the practice of law after ultimately I had to do it a little bit longer economically. I probably spent 2 decades in the practice of law. But like John, I got out of it, get back into martial arts, and everything I do today is an offshoot of that, right? I started a dojo here in Ann Arbor, learned how to market it. That gave rise to a marketing business. I've written books on that basis. You know what I mean? So I've made that vector consciously with my head up. And I'd like to be more famous and I'd like to have more money, but I can't say that I regret anything I'm doing on a daily basis because it all comes out of that moment of figuring out who I am and going forward from there.
I mean, I'm the same. No regrets. I want more money. I want more fame. But, well, I have regrets. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But if there was another path and entertainment did not exist, because Sensei Spears, it's the same within my business of acting. Like, if you can do anything else out there, people don't do this. It's so hard to get ahead. It's so hard. Like, unless you just love being on the stage for no money, because that you can do consistently. The rest is so inconsistent, it'll drive you crazy. But the military would always have been an option. But the one thing I'm not even sure I've said even to you, Sensei Dauphin, although I know you know my love of it, but if I go back in time, I'd be an architect. I used to love that. I studied it for a little. I didn't go far with it, but that'd be a whole different world. And I think that would be almost as good a life. No regrets, but any young actors out there, go be architects.
Be some weird fucking buildings, I'll tell you that.
Sensei Spears, you said why you did have a regret about your career. What would you have become? You could go back in time. What job do you take?
I think I would have stayed in the Army. I was never happier, you know. I mean, until much later in life, you know, until I, you know, got into my late 40s, you know, and was able to divide my time and go back into consulting and training and teaching and be really, you know, very focused on the kind of people I wanted to associate with and have an effect on their lives in the defense community. I would have just stayed in the Army. I was perfectly happy.
Love that. As I always say, time is real. Since I could talk to you all night, I'll put a button on my version of our talk together. But what we do is we go around the horn. We start with Hanshi Legacy. We chat a little about our time with you, and then the last word will go to you. And let's go to you, Hanshi Legacy. What do you want to say about our time tonight?
It was great, very interesting. Going through your military life and your aspirations and everything is sort of wakes you up a little bit where What I think a lot of is that um, our country is free because of military persons. And I think Canada realizes it's sort of the little sister of the United States, which is nothing to be ashamed in that. But I'm always grateful for the American military persons as well as the Canadians, because we know why Canada is sort of free. Right? Because if they ever came over the top, or you know, or someone decided to invade Canada, it's because I think we're in the same bed as the USA. So it was great to hear how hard you trained, and with the question I'll ask you was, how do you aim something and take somebody's life? So I wanted to sort of go through that and experience that. In our talk, we didn't have that, but how does a person go and kill other people and then come back and they're okay with that? They're all right, I guess. So
We can, maybe that's a conversation for for another time, but
Sure. That's one of our micros right
Yeah.
there.
yeah,
most of it is honestly, Gary, it's in context,
I understand that. Yeah.
and it's knowing that in your heart that you were right to do so.
Yeah. Taking one life to save a million.
No question about it. You're in military operations and law enforcement, special operations. There's two kinds of risks. There's individual risk and there's team risk. There's individual risk of death or injury or damage to your career, especially for our law enforcement guys. They get in an officer involved shooting, they're under a lot of scrutiny. There's team risk, which is primarily failure of the mission. We will always put individual risk in front of team risk to accomplish the mission. And when you're engaged in the act of killing to accomplish a mission, you sleep well at night. You sleep good. You feel good what you've done. We kind of, especially warriors at all levels, we set them up in this society through popular culture to make them believe that they're supposed to carry some kind of guilt, or that they're supposed to feel bad about themselves, or they're supposed to get PTSD because of the things that they saw and things that they did. Not that those things don't exist for valid and very good reasons, but what we don't teach those warriors who are out there, and being a warrior it's being a professional. It's more than what your ID card or your badge says. People who've never carried a government ID card or a badge can be professionals. The civilians I spent 20 years training come to me because they're professionals, or I help make them professionals. And teaching professionals at any level that they're not supposed to feel justified about using righteous force to protect innocent lives, be it themselves or others, we do people a great disservice by that. I spent the last 20 years doing what my mentor said was killing bad guys by proxy, training other guys to do their job. And the best feeling in the world is when you get that text at midnight or that phone call, and it's a guy saying, "Hey, you got a minute to talk?" And you pick up the phone and they say, "Hey, gotten an OIS earlier, can't get into specifics, but I dusted that guy. I put him down. I followed him to the ground. I rolled that gun. I felt the bolt closed the dust cover, engaged the mechanical safety, and watched him expire." And you know what I tell him? Great fucking job. That's what you're supposed to do.
Okay,
I'm
let's save
proud of
that.
you.
Let's save that for another time then.
Well, that's a great short episode that we want to get into. What about you, Sensei Suino? How do you want to go out on our night tonight?
Oh man. Holy shit, brother. It's like I talked to you last week and here we are again. This is
Time
so
don't
great.
pass between us.
I love it, brother. what can I say? You know, we've had the conversation together, and then I could talk for 3 hours about the experiences that John and I have had together, um, in the dojo, on the gun range, fishing,
In life,
in life,
just
making
in life.
steaks. He, I can't even begin to get into it. I'm so glad we did this, and we are not going to let a lot more time pass before we get in the same room with each other and continue the conversation. That's all I got.
Fact.
Thanks, Sensei Suino, Sensei Dauphin.
Said Spears, I write a bunch of notes. You said off top, martial arts is an outstanding way of developing aggression.
Aggressiveness.
Aggressiveness. Sorry.
Learn to
Aggression.
do it. My aggressiveness.
Semantics. You said aggressiveness. I like aggression. I like what you said about it being a living philosophy. I've always maintained that it can't exist unless two people are on the floor doing it. You used lots of different words, from heuristic, where people were grabbing dictionaries on PKCC trying to figure out what that is, to asshat and darn tootin'. Right. So I like your vernacular. It's very broad. I enjoy it a lot.
Well, I am a renowned author, you know.
I do know that. I like when you said all I ever wanted to do is jump out of airplanes and shoot bad guys. It's both simplistic and difficult. Both of those things are not easy. It's simple to say and hard to do. When we got into mandatory military service, I really liked when you said schools used to make people patriotic and then the military benefited from that. That's something for people to go and ponder about our education system right now, in free countries anyway.
Sure.
Defending yourself, drawing a pistol when I don't have a rifle. I like that. Most influential martial artist of all time for you is Sensei Suino in your life. That is, we all smile when we hear you say that. Next 5 years that you can continue to do it. God, well done, good and faithful servant. And then as Sean was saying, I really liked, I didn't expect that somebody like a spine surgeon, like when you say somebody's a spine surgeon, that's your biggest regret. That's so interesting. Like I'm going to be pondering that now. I'm going to ponder that for a long time. Because I think it's a really good lesson. Sensei Spears, I think what you gave everybody was a really good lesson to go away and, be careful what foot you put on what path, because it might take you far and deep in a direction that is not right for you, even though it's a good and honorable path. It might not be the right one for you. So thank you for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope, like Sensei Suino, I hope we can get together and just eat a steak and drink a beer and chat more.
Yes. Yes, that's the goal.
Thanks, Sensei Dauphin. Because I get to guide so much of the chat, I'm not going to say a lot other than you saying now is the best time. I am with you. I tell my students, I say, these are the glory days. There have been glory days, but these are them now for us. And the movie that comes to mind for me is Midnight in Paris. It's my favorite Woody Allen movie with Owen Wilson. And he keeps believing there's this other era. And then he goes back to that era, and everyone there wishes they were in the one 50 years earlier than that. And he's like, oh, there's no there. We're just
declinism.
It's beautiful. So thanks for reminding me of that. Thanks for saying that so firmly in a way that I agree with, but helps reinforce. And our last word goes to you.
Yes, that was declinism. That's the cognitive bias. I knew it's in there somewhere. Gentlemen, I thank you for tolerating me, and I feel incredibly honored and humbled that you would find anything that I said interesting or useful or in any way something to ponder in the future. It truly humbles me, and I thank you very much. I have such tremendous respect for everybody here, and to be considered a part of this community it just means a lot to me. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sensei. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We're so pleased you came. Good night, Senseis.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.